the mindset that winter is wonderful or winter is full of opportunity can actually help us respond more appropriately. Whereas often I think the mindset that winter is dreadful or winter is terrible leads to avoidance coping, where we don't want to dress up appropriately. We don't want to deal with it. We don't want to put in any effort. We don't want to change our routines. We want to pretend it's not happening, which is actually not useful and just makes things worse for us.
So, Kari Leibowitz, thank you so much for joining me on the Your Body's Weight podcast. I'm so excited to have this conversation because I've read your book recently, which is coming out at the end of October, and it's called
That's right.
How to Winter, Harness Your Mindset to Thrive on Cold, Dark, and Difficult Days. It was such a great read, and I absolutely can't wait to dive into the details on what you have to share about how to winter well, just like they do in the Nordic Arctic regions. So first of all, Kari, how are you doing? You're in Amsterdam at the moment.
I'm great. Yeah, I'm living in Amsterdam right now. It's really that sort of first real week of fall. The chill is in the air and the weather is turning. And I just restocked my tea collection, so I'll be drinking like a big cup of tea while I'm recording. And but it's also still pretty light out here because we haven't hit the fall equinox yet. So I'm good. I'm vibing. Yeah.
Good. And I know that stocking up on tea is one of your biggest tips that you took from the from Norway when you stayed there to prepare for winter. One of the main things is to stock up on tea and hot drinks and to make sure you've got all those things ready.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I really have done a lot more embracing seasonal eating. So I do cold breakfast in the summer and hot breakfast in the winter, and iced coffee in the summer and hot tea and coffee in the winter. And so it does give me a little something to look forward to as the days are getting colder.
Yeah, so you're an absolute pro in the onset of winter, and that's what we're going to talk about because let's face it, a lot of people struggle with the thought of winter coming because we're in September now, and I know when my mum says whenever September comes, that's when she starts to worry about winter, like she starts to dread it. So, first of all, I mean, your book is fantastic. I just wanted to say that nothing made me feel more cozy and more looking forward to returning to the winter one day because I live in Cayman, but I'm from London. So nothing made me want to look forward to that or to visit the Arctic region more than reading your book. It was so descriptive and it was so like, you know, when you discuss winter, it's, you know, candlelight and chunky knits and cold noses, but warm bodies. And I love that stuff. But why do you think that people dread winter so much? Like, what is that?
Well, thank you so much. I'm so thrilled that you liked the book and that at least for one person, it did what I was hoping it would do, which is romanticize the season and make it appealing. I think a lot of people have the real experience of being negatively affected by winter, right? So a lot of that comes in with the darkness, which can affect our sleep and our circadian rhythms and make us feel more tired and more lethargic. That in turn can affect our motivation, which can be sort of compounded by cold, wet weather, right? So it can make it harder to want to go outside and socialize or go outside and exercise and move our bodies. And so a lot of the things that make us feel good, that are good for us, can feel harder to do in the winter. And so I think a lot of people really struggle with those feelings. And then there's also, I think, this larger cultural narrative about winter, which is that it is inherently depressing, right? So there's a lot of talk about seasonal affective disorder or wintertime depression, which is relatively rare, but sort of has an outsized impact on our description and our understanding of the season, right? And so when we think of summer or when we think of warm weather, I think we tend to think of going to the beach and eating ice cream and picnics and barbecues and all these fun things. And when we think of winter, maybe there's some people who orient right to coziness and Christmas and tea and sweaters, but a lot of people go to doom and gloom and cold and darkness and depression. And so I think it's really a combination of objective circumstances of winter that do affect us and can be challenging, and also the narratives we have about the season and the scripts that we fall into as the season comes closer.
Yeah, because when I think about winter, when I look back at my time, I think of wetness, I think of rain, I think of grey skies, I think of, walking to work in the dark, blustery rain ruining my hair before I get into the office, and then, puddles getting up my leg, and, your trousers are soaked. And I think of all of those things. But what's really interesting about your book is, and we'll talk about how the book came about, because I'd love to know. But what your book basically says is it's all in the mindset. So if you approach winter with those memories and those thoughts, then yes, you're most likely going to have that experience. But what you learned from the people in Norway when you stayed there was that they had a completely different approach to winter, and therefore they could cope a lot better. So let's come to why you decided to write the book, and what brought you to Tromso in Norway, which is one of the most northern cities in the world.
Yeah, so I'm a psychologist by training. I'm actually a health psychologist, a researcher, and I'm really interested in what helps people thrive and what helps people flourish, right? How can we use our understanding of human psychology and human behavior to help people live happy, meaningful, fulfilled lives? And I was sort of in between undergrad and graduate school, and I was looking for a little bit of adventure and a little bit of research experience. And I found this amazing researcher named Yor Vitterso, who studies this very topic. He studies happiness, he studies life satisfaction, he studies personal growth. So, what inspires people to pursue challenges that can be difficult, but actually help them grow and evolve as people. And he just happens to be a researcher at the University of Tromso, which is the northernmost university in the world. And so, until I learned about his work, I had never heard of this city 200 miles north of the Arctic Circle in northern Norway. And I started doing this research about Tromso, and I found out that they have something called the polar night. So, the polar night is this time in the Arctic when the sun sets in Tromso. That's on November 21st, and then doesn't rise again for weeks or months. So in Tromso, it's down for 2 months and doesn't rise again until January 21st. And growing up actually in a beach town south of New York City in the US, I sort of had this bias against winter. I was like, summer is the best season, warm weather makes you happy, winter is depressing. So I was like, isn't it weird that this world expert on human happiness lives in this place that the sun doesn't rise for 2 months each winter? And I sort of wrote to Yoar, and we were scheming up some ideas for psychology research studies. And I was like, oh, yeah, let's study winter depression, of course, because everyone in Tromso must be depressed in the winter. And he was like, yeah, sure, you could try, but we actually don't really find any major differences in depression in the winter in Tromso. And I was like, that's weird. The sun doesn't rise for 2 months and people there aren't depressed. Like, why is that? And it sort of led to me getting a grant and moving to the Arctic, which was exciting and scary to study this myself. And I did find that people there tend to have a really different approach, both an approach that is very practical in terms of adapting their behavior to the winter, living seasonally, dressing appropriately, and an approach that is really psychological in terms of their mindset, in terms of the stories they tell themselves about the meaning of winter, the things that they look forward to and anticipate rather than dread when they think about the onset of the season. And so I really saw that it's possible to have a different approach to winter, and that this sort of story I had absorbed my whole life that winter is inherently depressing was in fact not the whole truth, and was just one sort of biased perspective of the season.
What I find really interesting is, so you're the same. You went into this thinking, oh, winter is inherently depressing. And I think a lot of people feel the same. But So when you went to Norway, you found that you actually had to change that question. Like, rather than how are you coping with this depressing weather, you had to change it and say, well, actually, how are you thriving then? Like, how are you doing this? Because what I found really interesting is I just typed in the happiest countries on earth, and it just happened to be that whole region. Like, Finland is number one. You obviously know this. In 2024, they announced that if Finland is number one, followed by Denmark and Iceland, which are all in the same region, and Sweden and the Netherlands and Norway, they're all in the top 10. So it's like, and disease rates as well, they're also very low compared to the rest of the world. I mean, what do you think that is? Like, because after spending your time there, I mean, what hits you the most about why, is it obvious to you now that you've spent time there?
Well, I think these questions of happiness are really interesting and really multifaceted, right? I
Mm,
think a lot of people outside of these regions hear that they're the happiest countries and they think joyful, they think giddy, they think excited. And really, a lot of the happiness comes down to uh, a contentment and a satisfaction with the state of your life and sort of a more stable, deep sense of well-being. So I'm a social psychologist by training, so I study both, how individuals respond to things and how our own mindsets and perspectives and beliefs shape us, but also how the social context and the world shapes us. And I think that a lot of the Nordic region that always comes up on the top of the happiness rankings really has both. So I think you can't have this conversation without talking about the social safety supports of these countries, right? The very good healthcare, the very high standard of living, the extremely well-funded parental leave and education policies. They're also countries that tend to focus a lot on equality. So Finland, for example, is not only often ranked as the happiest country in the world, it's also a world leader in education. But about 40 years ago in the 80s, when they decided to really work on their education system, they saw a lot of problems. They decided that they weren't going to focus on excellence in education. They were going to focus on equality. And they wanted to make sure that every school around the country was offering the same level of education. And in some of these countries, it's actually illegal to charge money for private education. And so you can have a private school, but you can't charge private tuition. And so what does that do? That incentivizes even the wealthier families to make sure that their public schools are really good. And so there's a lot of these really interesting things about then how does that influence how you're comparing yourself to your neighbors in terms of a standard of life? How does that influence trust in a society? These countries tend to have really high trust in society, trust in each other, trust in government. You can see this in a lot of the Nordic regions. It's very common to leave babies napping outside. So there's
yes,
the
that's so
belief.
fascinating.
It's
Yeah.
so fascinating. There's the belief and there's research to back it up that when babies are dressed appropriately, bundled up in their prams, they sleep longer and deeper outside in the cold. And of course, you going into a coffee shop and leaving your baby outside to nap in Copenhagen is only possible in a very safe country. So I think there's a lot of that sort of general social safety net. And then I think there is a mindset factor. I think there is, right, this sort of um, contentment with what you have. There's a Swedish word called lagom, which means not too much, not too little, right? Having the right amount. So there's not this concept for a lot of people of always wanting more and more and more. Also, all of these countries, I do think, relevant to a lot of what you talk about on the podcast, really value outdoor movement and activity in all weather. So certainly in Norway, there's this concept called friluftsliv, which means open air life and getting time outdoors in nature, using your body to walk or hike or ski. Kids play outside in all weather from a very young age, bundled up, dressed appropriately. And I do think that movement, that connection with nature are things that we know promote well-being. There's also, Finland has this big sauna culture that really promotes well-being. So I think there's these really interesting combination of the social factors of these countries, plus some of these individual cultural habits and practices that do things that promote well-being and that promote mindfulness and connection with other people and connection with nature and movement, all of those things that we know are really basically natural antidepressants and really healthy for people.
So, how is their mindset different from ours, let's say? Because when it comes to the polar night, which is the few months, is it 2 months?
It's
2
2 months
months.
in Tromso, yeah.
2 months when the sun doesn't rise. So basically, it's
Mhm.
dark the whole time. How, I mean, you would think, first of all, you'd think, oh my gosh, lack of light, surely that's linked to depression, it's linked to, lack of well-being overall. But is that true? And also, how do they approach that time?
Let me give a little bit of what the polar night is actually like, right? Because I
Mm,
think people hear polar night and they think full darkness for 24 hours a day. And in Tromsø, that's not the case. So in Tromsø, during the polar night, the sun is skirting below the horizon for a few hours a day. So the same way, the sky is light right before the sun rises or right after it sets, you have that sort of subtle twilight for a few
mm.
hours each day, which
It
can
sounds
actually
lovely.
be really beautiful. It's a really special time of year. There are places, so north of Tromsø is Svalbard, which is an Arctic island
Can't
halfway
imagine that.
between northern Norway and the North Pole. And they have a 4 month polar night, and the middle of that is 2 months where it really is no sun for 2 months, no light at all, no change from one day to the next, which is a lot more extreme. But I think one of the big things about the mindset that I noticed in Tromsø and that now I've seen in people who tend to have a really positive mindset about winter is seeing it as a time full of opportunity. So I think a lot of people, and this is certainly how I grew up, see it as a season of limitations. And we focus on all of the things that we can't do or that are harder to do in the winter, right? I can't go to the beach. I can't go hiking. I can't motivate myself to go to the gym. I can't, sit outside and drink a beer on the terrace. Like all of these things I like to do, I'm limited in my options because the weather is not warm and sunny and friendly to those activities. But I think people in Tromsø really see the winter as a time of year that they get to do other things, right? So that's the time of year that they get to rest, that they get to slow down, that they get to be cozy indoors and eat dinner by candlelight, that they get to go to the sauna and do cold water swimming, and do yoga by candlelight when it's dark outside. And so I think it's really the difference between, oh, I can't do all of these other things, but then what does that actually make space for? What does that mean that I get to do? And really indulging in the winter as a time of year for those special activities. And I do think, I think it's important to recognize, I think that people in Tromsø do feel the lack of light, right? So lots of people will sit in front of sun lamps. It's very common for people on their lunch breaks to go outside at the brightest part of the day. There's celebrations when the sun comes back in January, but all of that is also accompanied with an appreciation of the polar night, of what's special about it, of what's beautiful about it, of what feels better and more pleasurable to do in the dark. And I think it's really important to allow those things to coexist, right? That you can be sad that summer is over and the days are getting shorter, even as you welcome the longer nights and dinner by candlelight and coming home and taking a bath after work. And that it doesn't have to be all one or the other, that you can feel both of those things at the same time.
There's this really lovely quote, and I can't remember who it was by in your book, but basically it says this. It says, looking at non-human life on Earth, it becomes apparent how foolish the notion is that we can enter and exit the winter without changing our sleep, diet, or social behavior. Do you remember who did that quote?
I think it's me. I wrote
Oh, heck,
that.
do you know what? I got confused because I put it in quotations, and usually
No,
I do
that's
that when I've
great.
quoted
Hell
a
yeah. I
quote, but
love
that's
you
you,
being like,
okay?
there's this beautiful quote. And I'm like, that's my writing.
That is a great quote because basically, what you're saying is in Tromsø, let's say in the US or the UK, which is where I'm from, we expect ourselves to go, 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 go. like all throughout the year, no pause, no rest. Our society is so based around just fighting and getting to the top, and that happens all throughout the year. You can't slow down, basically. That's in our mental, like the way we think. And I guess the same goes for like physical activity and for being in shape and things. We think we've got to go 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 go, and actually there's a time and a place for that stuff. And that quote, that beautiful quote, Kari, basically says that it's if you look at nature and if you look at the way animals hibernate and the way they stock up for winter on their food, and the way the leaves fall, and how everything's changing, it's kind of foolish to look at it at ourselves and think we need to be the same all year round, same diet, same activity. Like, what are your thoughts on
Oh,
that?
totally. I mean, this was a really an epiphany that I had as I was researching winter and writing this book, is that every other living thing changes its behavior in the winter.
Right.
And that it's really natural and healthy and adaptive to have that response. And this is something you really see in Tromso, is where, if you live in a place with such extreme seasons, so the opposite of the polar night is the midnight sun, which is 2 months every summer where the sun never sets, right? So they're going from 2 months of full sun to 2 months of no sun. And of course, you're going to be more tired in the winter and sleep more and eat different foods and do different things. And of course, in the summer, you're going to be more active and spend more time outdoors and sleep a little bit less. And that just makes sense. But I think in other parts of the world where the seasons are not so apparently and so obviously extreme, we sort of delude ourselves into thinking we should have, like you said, the same schedule year round, the same productivity, the same exercise routine, the same socializing habits. But it really doesn't make any sense. I mean, if you start to look into it, in Boston in the US, for example, I think there's a 6 hour difference in daylight between summer and winter. In London, I think it's 9 hours. There's a 9 hour difference between the longest days of the year and the shortest days of the year. Of course, we are going to be affected by that. But what I see happen so often is you get to November, you get to the clock change, you get to December, and you hear people saying things like, "Oh, I'm so tired. I don't know what's wrong with me." Or, "I'm so tired. I must have winter depression." When in fact, that is a totally normal response to this change in our environment. And the only problem is really how we're making sense of that and how we're interpreting that, and whether or not we're saying, it's bad that I feel more tired. I'm not allowed to feel more tired. I'm weak. I'm lazy. There's something wrong with me. Or are we saying, oh, yeah, this is my time of year to do a little bit less and to slow down and to sleep more. And this is an opportunity for me to get in tune with that. And I think it's actually a really valuable lesson that winter has to teach us that can serve us year round, right? Even if you or an extremely active, extremely fit person, we are all going to have times of life where we're forced to slow down, right?
Mm.
You get sick, you have to recover from an injury or surgery, you give birth, you're burned out, you're grieving. Like, these times of life are going to come for us, whether we like it or not. And they're often outside of our control, just like winter darkness. And so, practicing being in tune with our bodies and allowing ourselves to have ebbs and flows of energy, and times of the year when we're more active and more productive, and times of the year when we're more restful and we slow down, is actually a really healthy and adaptive way to be, that can prepare us for when we meet challenges in other seasons outside of the winter.
I think what's really popular in the health space at the moment, I don't know if you've come across it yourself, but women are appreciating a lot more the the way they feel during their cycle, for example. So
Yes.
like it's such a big thing now, and women are actually accepting it now. So we're accepting the fact that there are times in our cycle when we're going to be really extroverted, we're going to be really active, and then there's times in our cycle when we're going to be more introverted, and that's when
Hmm.
we should book less social activities, and when we should rest a bit more. And I think that's becoming a lot more accepted. And the way you're talking, it's almost like looking at it on an even bigger scale. It's like, okay, so how
Hmm.
is the year affecting you? And I think it makes a lot of sense, during the winter, that's your time to kind of take things down a notch. Would you say in Tromso that's what they do? So in winter, when it comes to their life in general, they tend to slow everything down in the winter. And if so,
Yes.
what's their best tips to slow down?
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's a lot more expected there, right?
Mm.
That of course you're going to be more tired in the winter. Of course you're going to slow down. And I have friends there who talk about winter coming on as being a relief. That,
Mm.
I've just had a crazy summer. I was traveling all over. My brother got married. My husband's brother had a baby. We had weddings here, weddings there. We were going all over and it was great. And I loved it. But now going into the fall, going into the winter, I feel like I can take a breath. I feel like, oh, I can get back in front of my computer again and write and do these other things that are important to me. And I think they have that feeling there too, that they are go, go, go in the summer, but that is enabled and facilitated by this winter season of slowing down. The Norwegian word for coziness is kuslig. So you might be familiar with the Danish word hygge, right? And these are really important cultural concepts for reveling in coziness, reveling in ways of enjoying ourselves that are not so high energy, right? That's not excitement, joy, giddiness. It's calmness, serenity, peacefulness. It's still very positive. It feels very good, but it is more restorative and it's more nourishing. And I think people there expect to slow down a little bit as it gets darker, right? So some people might do fewer social things. They might switch from a more intense training workout season to a more restful restorative season, especially in the fall, right? In Norway, in the summer you can go hiking, in the winter you can go skiing, but there's that in between season where it's sort of dark and rainy, where you're neither really going to be skiing, nor are you going to be hiking. And so that's maybe a time for a different kind of exercise, right? Something that is more stretching, that is more restorative, that is slower kind of strength training. I think, eating different foods is seen as really normal, right? That you would look forward to those warming soups and stews and roasts and things. And that there's just sort of this natural energy and seasonal ebb and flow to the year that is not seen as problematic, is seen as just, of course, the way that you would react living in a place like that.
Should we be sleeping more in the winter?
So I think the should is a really hard thing. I think if you feel more tired and you are able to sleep more, then that is great and it's not a problem. I
Mm.
think if you have the energy and you don't sleep more in the winter, that is also fine. I personally really feel the effects of the season. So I now live in Amsterdam, which is actually farther north than the entire continental US. And I feel the effects of the light. I wake up naturally earlier in the summer. All of a sudden, in summer in Amsterdam, it can be light out until like 11 o'clock at night almost. And so it'll be 9:30 and I'm like, oh shoot, I haven't eaten dinner yet. Whereas in the winter, I'm going to sleep a little later because the sun is rising later. I'm going to eat dinner a little earlier and feel more tired and go to bed earlier. And I think that that is healthy and normal. There is some research, it's very new, suggesting that people do sleep longer in the winter than in the summer. And so I think if you feel that way, if you can make space for it, that's a really healthy response and not something to feel like is problematic. Now, of course, all of this requires nuance, right? If you're sleeping all the time in a way that's not making you feel good, right? We've probably all had those weekends where you go too far and you don't get out of bed and then you feel kind of blah afterwards. Then that's too far on one end of the spectrum. But if you need more time on the couch, if you need more time in bed, if you need more other kinds of rest practices in your day in the winter, I think that that is a very normal response, and making space for that is actually really healthy.
Because there's a lot of shame attached to sleeping too much, like as some would say, too much in quotes. And there's a lot of shame around
Yes,
that in our society.
I have
But,
a
but then
yeah,
melatonin naturally rises when it gets dark, right? So in winter, we naturally have more melatonin. We're naturally going to be more sleepy. Go on, what were you going to say?
totally. Yeah, I
Mm.
have I have a chronic case of what my husband and I call snooze guilt,
Mm.
because I'm not a morning person. I've always needed a lot of sleep to feel good. I spent a lot of time in therapy trying to work on my relationship to rest and sleep,
Wow.
because I think there's a moralization of not sleeping a lot, right? That if you don't sleep, you're more dedicated, you're a harder worker, you're more
That's right.
productive,
Yeah.
and that if you need a lot of sleep, you are lazy, you don't have a lot of willpower, you
Mhm.
are weak. But there's all this evidence that sleep is extremely important for our health and well-being, and that actually prioritizing good healthy sleep habits and getting the right amount of sleep that your body needs, which varies a lot from person to person. There's also evidence that women need more sleep than men. Um, is just as important as your fitness routine, as eating healthy, as, not smoking and not drinking too much, that sleep is really, really critical. And so really treating it as something that you have to earn, that
Mm.
you're only allowed to rest when you're tired if you've done everything on your to-do list, I think is really harmful and is really the
Mm.
byproduct of a culture that doesn't care about human well-being as much as
Mm.
it cares about productivity. And so I think winter can be a time to practice fighting against that and practice making space. And of course, this is not always easy, right? Like we have a lot of things that we want to do. We have a lot of things that we have to do. We have jobs, we have childcare, we have elder care, we have other responsibilities. And so I think there's a couple of things we can do. Is one is we can intentionally slow down, pump the brakes, say no to more things, clear space. This is something I think can be especially useful right around the time of the clock change, the end of
Mm.
daylight savings time, right? If you can make more space in your calendar because you know you're going to be more tired that week, that is really valuable. It can be something that can be good to do after the craziness of the holidays as well. Say you're intentionally going to give yourself a little more time to rest. You're going to say no to more things. But if you can't sleep an extra hour or two every night, where can you find smaller moments of rest throughout your day where, you're having a mindful moment with your tea or your coffee in the morning, or you're extending your evening shower or bath time routine by 10 minutes, or you're stretching before bed, or when you get home from work, right? I think rest can take a lot of different forms. Sleeping is one of my favorites, but there's also lots of other things that are restorative if you feel like more sleep isn't feasible for where you're at right now.
I'm wondering, I mean, I know you said that there's lots of factors that affect how happy a country is and how content they are, but I'm just wondering if that has something to do with it as well. The fact that they go with the ebbs and flows of the season and they go along with their physiology, because there's a part in your book. I mean, you've just said you've always thought you'll need to sleep. You've always kind of,
Mhm,
gotten
mhm.
therapy and you thought there's something inherently wrong with you. But when you went to I can't remember which part, maybe it was back to Tromso or maybe it was another city, you said you actually went with the season and you actually slept a
Mhm,
lot more and you actually went with your body and you felt really good and you felt happy and you
mhm.
felt like this is how it should be in the winter. So I want, and by default, I imagine you were much happier at that time, because you're going with your body. So would you say that has something to do with it?
I mean, I don't know of any data that speaks to this specifically,
Mm.
but I think this idea of both being in tune with the seasons and in tune of what your body needs is really good for our well-being. I'll also say again, this is another thing that it's easier to do in a country with good social supports, right?
Mm.
So in the US, we have a concept of sick days where you have a certain number of sick days that you can use up. In the
Same UK,
Nordics,
yeah.
right. In the Nordics,
Mm.
that's not a thing. There's not a number of sick days. If you're sick, you're sick. If your kid is sick, then your kid is sick and you stay home from work and everyone understands. And so I think that makes it a lot easier, right? To listen to your body and say, oh, yes, I'm sick. I need to slow down. I need to rest. I need to stay home without the stress of, okay, well, how sick am I? Is it worth using a sick day? Should I power through? Should I go in? And so right, these things all facilitate each other, right? That having a society that is set up for human beings in
Mm.
human bodies in a natural environment makes it easier to listen to your body, which I do think increases your overall happiness and well-being. And yeah, probably makes it so that it's less stressful to be sick. It's
Mm.
never fun, but that it's not such a big stressor, and teaches you that it's okay to be sick and rest and take time off when you need it, rather than this idea that, oh, we have to power through regardless.
Mm. So for me, I have to say there's an elephant in the room for me when it comes to sunlight and health, because sunlight obviously triggers the production of vitamin D in your
Mhm.
skin. So when you have 2 months of no sunlight, how do the people in Tromsø overcome that? Do they fall more ill during that time, or do they supplement? What do they do?
Yeah, so vitamin D deficiency is something you have to be aware of during the polar night. And a lot of people in Norway will get their vitamin D levels checked. A lot of them will take supplements. Some of them will sit in front of sun lamps, or will also, the sort of traditional way is to take cod liver oil as a
Mm.
supplement. But even I, living in Amsterdam, where the winters are long and dark and gray, I'll take vitamin D as well. And so I do think, right, it's about your mindset and how you respond to things, but your mindset always interacts with your objective circumstances, right? And so it's the interplay of these things and being smart about it, right? So I think another good example, right? They take vitamin D if they need vitamin D. It's very practical. They dress appropriately for the weather. In Scandinavia, there's this saying, there's no such thing as bad weather, only bad clothing. So they are wearing woolen undergarments, they're wearing waterproof outer layers, they're wearing waterproof boots so that they can go outside and be comfortable. And I think part of adapting to the season is recognizing that you need different behavior. It's the same, you wouldn't go to the beach in the Caymans for the whole day without putting on sunscreen, I
Mm.
imagine, right? Or go on a big hike in the summer without drinking water, right? Different environmental conditions require us to be aware of their effects on our bodies. And part of adapting is fortifying ourselves appropriately, whether that's taking vitamin D or dressing appropriately or getting enough sleep, And so I think the mindset that winter is wonderful or winter is full of opportunity can actually help us respond more appropriately. Whereas often I think the mindset that winter is dreadful or winter is terrible leads to avoidance coping, where we don't want to dress up appropriately. We don't want to deal with it. We don't want to put in any effort. We don't want to change our routines. We want to pretend it's not happening, which is actually not useful and just makes things worse for us.
Mm. And so, obviously, preparing for winter, you gave some really good tips. So, for example, stocking up on hot teas and drinks was one. And can you just remind me of some others?
Yeah. So a lot of it has to do with setting ourselves up so that we can take advantage of what is special about the winter, right? So, what is better in the cold? Drinking hot beverages. What is better in the dark, right? Having a cozy movie night, eating dinner
Mm.
by candlelight, getting some of these supplies ready. I also think it helps us get into the right headspace as well as be more comfortable, right? So you can put the heavier duvet on your bed. You can make sure, bring out all your winter coats and hats and scarves and gear and see if you need anything new for this year. You can move your sweaters and your thick socks to the front of the closet. And, all of these things, they feel kind of small. They feel so small as to feel
Mm.
like, oh, will that really make a difference? Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Light some candles, blah, 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 then I won't be depressed. But really, if you do them with this mindset and intention of preparing for winter, welcoming winter, instead of this sort of dread that's happening in the back of your mind, right? Like your mom who starts
Yeah.
dreading it
She's
around
dreading it right now
September.
as we speak. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Instead of all of that happening in the back of your mind, you're sort of proactively
Mm.
anticipating some of the things that you have to look forward to. You can also do things like, you know, say that you're going to have a cozy roast dinner party with friends, plan
Mm.
a soup swap, plan a movie night. Like I'm trying to get all of my friends to go see the new Beetlejuice
Oh,
movie for spooky
yes. Yeah, that
season,
came out
like
last weekend, didn't it?
right, like
Yeah.
do
Yeah.
the seasonal things
Yeah.
to sort of get into the spirit, right? I mean, people often do this for Christmas very
Mm.
naturally. You do it when you prepare for summer vacation if you're going to go to the beach for a week. And so doing this for winter not only sets up our physical space to make us comfortable when it's cold and dark, but also helps prep our mindset and helps start orienting us not just to the fact that it's going to be gray and rainy and cold, but to all of the opportunities that that is going to provide for these sort of little moments of pleasure and enjoyment.
And so one of those opportunities that the people in the Nordic region have is the opportunity to exploit the cold um, swims and to embrace the
Yes.
cold. So I wanted to spend the last part of this conversation talking about saunas and talking about the cold. So whether that be cold plunges, cold swims, because you describe your first, the first time you did the cold swim and you did the
Mhm.
sauna. So explain what that was like and what are the health benefits there? Why should someone do sauna and cold?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So when people ask me what changed for me personally the most in writing this book, this is the chapter. It's this chapter on sauna and cold water where I have become a cold water swimming convert and a sauna proselytizer
Because you
because
never swam in the cold, right? It
I
was like a
never did
big
cold
no-no.
water swims. And most of my winter strategies were like bundle up, be cozy, be warm. Like I don't like to be cold. You
Yeah,
know, I think
same.
most people don't
Mm.
like to be cold. And also I thought it was too niche to include in the book. I was like, people who do cold water swimming, they're really hardcore, they're like super athletic, like the average person isn't going to do this. But then in multiple countries in the Nordics, talking to multiple people of different ages and different backgrounds, I was asking people, what's the number one thing that helps you in the winter? And they were saying cold water swimming. And
Really? Wow,
so
that's
I
fascinating.
felt like I just couldn't ignore it anymore. So the research on cold water swimming is really fascinating. So if you have never done it before, it sounds a little bit crazy. It sounded crazy to me too. If you do it, you probably are like a total proselytizer. I've heard that in the UK, this idea of the cold water swimming evangelist is like almost cliche,
Mm.
especially during COVID. But
I do cold
it
baths, but not
you do cold
cold swim.
baths?
Yeah.
Really? I'm
Yeah.
the opposite. Like I cannot do a cold bath or a cold shower, but
Uh,
if I'm in like a natural body of water, I can do the cold swim, which
mm.
is obviously not accessible to everyone. So cold baths work just as well. But what they do is, I mean, first of all, is the initial cold water exposure releases a bunch of endorphins in your body. So you get a little bit high, like you get this sort of euphoric feeling afterwards when you get out. It's sort of like if you've done a really hard workout, right? And afterwards you get that sort of runner's high or endorphin rush of a really intense physical stressor, is basically what
Mhm.
it is. And that's part of what makes it really useful because we so many of us, all of us, I would say, are dealing with these low level stressors all the time, but our bodies rarely get the opportunity to release that physical stress, right? And so getting this really intense physical stressor gives our body sort of the opportunity to react. And all of our heart is pumping and our blood vessels are constricting and our blood is rushing to our core, and it sort of completes the stress cycle, right?
Mm.
Of you've been stressed, you've been feeling it, and then you've had this big physical experience. The other thing that cold water swimming does, if you do it regularly, is it increases the production of brown fat in our bodies.
Mm.
So most of the fat in our bodies is white fat, and that's what we think of when we think of fat. But there is also brown fat, which is a thermoregulator. So it keeps us warmer when it's cold and colder when it's warm. And for a long time, it was thought that only babies had brown fat. So
'Cause they don't
um,
shiver.
they don't shiver, which I
Right.
never knew until I
Yes.
was researching this. But because babies cannot shiver, which is a mechanism that helps warm our bodies in the cold, they need a lot of brown fat because that's what helps regulate their body temperature. And it was thought that we all lost our brown fat as we aged. And then they started discovering, they first discovered this actually in Finnish outdoor workers who were exposed to the cold for long periods of time, higher levels of brown fat. And now it's been discovered that with regular and repeated exposure to the cold, your body can produce brown fat, and brown fat can even turn some of the white fat in your body into brown fat. And brown fat It helps regulate your temperature, so it actually keeps you warmer when it's cold, which is why repeated cold water swimming can help make you less susceptible to the cold. But it
Mm.
also has a lot of other health benefits. So it helps regulate your metabolism. It helps regulate your insulin, so it's protective against things like diabetes. And we're still discovering a lot of the health benefits of brown fat, but it seems to be really good for sort of maintaining the systems in our bodies.
You
And
said something. Sorry,
oh,
I'll just
oh
cut in
yes,
there, just because you did say something. You said cold water exposure transforms our bodies, and you talked about that in regards to the brown fat. Because if it regulates insulin, then that means it must have some effect on weight loss as well, right? So if it must increase your metabolism, it must make you more insulin sensitive, meaning that you're less likely to hold on to body fat. Is that right?
that's correct. Yes,
Yeah.
there's evidence that it regulates our metabolism, and so is adaptive in helping maintain a healthy weight. There's also
Mm.
evidence that regular cold water swimming is good for the immune system, and so that people who uh, are cold swimming regularly are less susceptible to colds and viruses, which can be
Mm.
especially
That's
important
so
in the winter
ironic.
months. It's so
Yeah.
ironic. And both cold water swimming and sauna are basically stressors on the cardiovascular system, right? So it causes your blood vessels to constrict, it causes your heart to pump, it causes, your body to work hard to maintain a normal temperature. And another thing that is a cardiovascular stressor is exercise. And
Mm.
so it seems like sauna and cold water swimming have some of the similar cardiovascular health benefits to regular moderate exercise. And this was what totally converted me for the sauna. So there's amazing research on sauna in Finnish populations where going to the sauna is so popular that you have a natural group of people you can study, because you can study people who go to the sauna more frequently with people who go to the sauna less frequently. You actually really can't find anyone to study in Finland who never goes to the sauna. um, but if you look at people who go to the sauna more frequently, you can look at men and women over periods of 10 or 15 years, and you see that people who go to the sauna more often have huge reductions in death from cardiovascular illnesses. So, reductions in heart attack, in heart disease, in stroke. Going to the sauna regularly reduces your risk of Alzheimer's. It's also good for things like migraines and skin conditions and muscle soreness. So, I mean, in Finland, they've called the sauna the poor man's pharmacy for years. But as an American, I sort of had this view of the sauna as like, it's like going to the spa, it's very
We associate it with
sumptuous
lazy days.
with lazy
Yeah.
days, right? And it's so indulgent. But now I'm like, oh my God, especially for people, right? Maybe people who have physical injuries, people who are older, people who are recovering from things. If you can't go to the gym and do cardiovascular exercise, you can go to the sauna and get a lot of the same benefits. Now, you're
Love
not going to
that.
get the muscle strengthening, but you're going to get that cardiovascular workout. And it's extremely health promoting. And so now I'm like, yeah, every time I go to the sauna, I'm like, oh, this is so good for me. Like I'm being so healthy right now.
I feel the
Um,
same. I feel the same.
yeah,
I mean, this is really exciting stuff. So, how often do we need to be doing this in order to get those health benefits, and for how long each time?
right. So in those studies, what they do is they compare frequent sauna users, who are people who usually go to the sauna 4 to 6 times a week, to less frequent, usually 1 to 3 times a week. And they find these massive reductions. But I believe that based on the mechanism and how it works, it would be similar to moderate exercise, which is any increase is better than what you're doing now. So if you
Mm.
never go to the sauna, going a couple times a month is better than what you're doing now. If you can go once or twice a week, that's even better. If you can go 5 days a week, that's great. But most of us, in Finland, there's one sauna for every two people in the country. And
Yes.
most Finns have saunas in their homes. So unless you live in Finland, you probably don't have such easy access to a sauna. If you have one, at the gym or in your apartment complex, consider using it a little bit more, because it does seem like more is better. But any amount is going to confer some of these benefits. And I think it's also really important that, I've heard some people have this sort of biohacking perspective, right? Of it's the hot box and the heat is doing all the work. And certainly the heat seems to be the main mechanism for these cardiovascular benefits. But in Finland, going to the sauna is a psychological, social, physical experience, right? So you have that physical intensity of the heat, but you're very often going with family or friends and having this moment of social connection. You are having mindful time in the sauna. You're disconnected from screens. You're relaxing. You're slowing down. And all of those things confer health benefits, right? And so I think, especially if you could do it with friends and family, there's no reason to think that it wouldn't amplify the health effects of going to the sauna.
Mm.
That it wouldn't amplify the health effects of going to the sauna by yourself. So I think you can look at all of these things together, and try to find more time in the sauna this winter. And as far as how long, it's really about building up. So I think, right, a lot of people go to the sauna and think of it as an endurance test,
Mhm.
and then they're less likely to do it repeatedly because it's not actually fun. And when I was in Finland, they're not so obsessed with these metrics and these numbers, both with cold water swimming and with going to the sauna. So there's some evidence that shows that, 52 minutes in the sauna a week and 11 minutes of cold water swimming a week is ideal for reaping these benefits. But when I actually talk to people in Finland who are doing these practices, they say however long feels good, however many minutes feels good. And, if it's a new practice for you, it might be very short and you might need to build up. As a cold water swimmer, sometimes in the beginning, you're staying in for 10 or 15 seconds. And then if you do it regularly, you find you can stay in longer. And it's the same in the sauna. Sometimes if I haven't been in a while, 10 minutes and I need a break. And then if I'm doing it more regularly, I can actually build up and stay in longer. But I think it can also be a practice in listening to your body and being in
Mm.
tune with what your body needs. And so, my personal advice is to do what feels good. And so that you're inspired to do it more frequently, and don't obsess over whether or not you're getting the right dose?
Right. And does doing both of them in the same session, does that compound the effects or not so much? So in one of your examples, you did the swim and then you did the sauna, and then you're like, I want to do
Mhm.
it again. And then so you did it again, swim, and then the sauna. So does that compound the effects or does it not matter? You can do them individually.
These things, the research on a lot of this is still in its infancy, especially with cold water swimming. So I don't know of any data that looks at that specifically. I would imagine that it both compounds the effects, right? That if you're going back and forth, that's an even greater stressor on your
Mm,
cardiovascular system, right? And that's what's giving you those benefits. So, of course, if you have heart problems, be careful, ease in,
mm,
take a ladder, don't jump into the cold water, all of those kinds of things. Use your good sense and listen to your body about how to sort of do this. But I do think going back and forth, both can compound the effects in terms of the cardiovascular benefits and the stress on the body, but also in terms of making both more enjoyable. Like, I really like to do the cold water swim when I
same.
know the
Yeah.
sauna is waiting for me. And also, then I can spend more time in the sauna if I'm intermittently getting myself really cold. But also, if you can only do that separately, if you have a cold plunge, in your backyard and a sauna at your gym and you can't do them together, you're still going to get the benefits as well. So I think, do what you have access to, experiment with what feels good for you.
Hmm.
And yeah, then see how you feel as a result. There's also a lot of evidence that both of these practices can improve sleep in the winter,
Mm.
which it's funny because you can feel more tired in the winter, but sleep quality can be lower, especially if you're not as active during the day. And so sometimes when I get that, like, I'm really tired, but I feel like I can't sleep very well in the winter, going to the sauna or doing a cold water swim really can help me sleep more deeply at night. And the research supports that.
And you also say sleeping in a cold room really helps with sleep as well. So I
Yeah.
actually
So
turned my air conditioning down by 1 degree last night because of that. I was like, "Right, I'm gonna turn it down," and it did get chillier, and then I fell asleep like normal. I don't have any issues going to sleep, but it was a good sleep. So
Yes, it's just like the babies sleeping outside in Scandinavia,
yeah.
right? Is that being warm in a cold space helps trigger the release of melatonin. So actually, your body being cold uh, tells your body to release melatonin. And so that's also why actually hot water bathing at night, so taking a bath before bed, this is sort of paradoxical, but heating your body up
Mm.
sends the message to your body to cool itself down. And that triggers the release of melatonin. And so, similarly, then being in a cold room, making your body a little bit colder before you get into a warm bed can trigger the release of melatonin and help you sleep more deeply.
So just final question. Just say, because I'm thinking of people in London at the moment and maybe other cities around the world where it's very residential, there's no lakes anywhere. And if there are, they're probably filthy.
Yes.
So nobody wants to swim. They probably don't have access to a sauna unless they go to the local spa for a treat. So what tips do you have for a person who doesn't have access to those things? How could they
So
get the cold and the heat?
there's a lot of research also on hot water bathing. A lot of that comes from Japan, where the onsen culture, or going to the communal hot spring baths, is very popular, especially in the winter. And so there's research showing that hot water bathing, so taking a bath or even a hot shower, can confer a lot of benefits. So it actually reduces wintertime depression, it improves your sleep. It has some of these same cardiovascular benefits as going to the sauna. And so doing hot water bath, even a foot bath, they find can
Mm.
improve sleep in the winter. So upping your sort of hot water bathing game, showering or taking a bath at night before bed can be really helpful in the winter. And then also, cold water swimming works because it's such intense cold exposure. And of course, you could do that at home in a bathtub or a cold water shower, but also spending more time outside in the cold will give you some of that cold exposure. And you can think about the sort of temperature adaptation and regulation, right? Think about the first really chilly day of autumn and how many sweaters you want to wear versus that same temperature day in spring after the winter feels balmy. You feel like you can go out in a t-shirt, and that's because we do adapt to the cold over time. And so if you go
Mm.
outside, if you take cold walks, maybe in the evenings after work or in the morning before work, the sort of crisp air can really wake you up. You can get some of those same benefits of that cold adaptation as well. And so I think there's a lot of ways to make this work wherever you live. And you know as I work on being sort of a recovering perfectionist, I really see the value in doing things imperfectly, right? And that anything worth doing is worth doing 10% of the way, right? And so any of these practices, find a way that feels accessible for you. Start small, try it out, see how you feel in your city, your town, your house, your community, and then see how it affects your experience of the winter. And if you like it, keep doing it. And if not, try something else.
I love that. Oh, Carrie, this has been such a great conversation. And like I
Oh, it's
said,
been great to chat with you.
it's been
Yeah.
so lovely. And like I said before we press record, I don't have to deal with any of that stuff because I'm looking outside right now and it's sunny and it'll be sunny tomorrow and it'll be sunny in December and it'll be sunny in like July. It's just all it's the same basically all year. But I do have the cold plunge and I have access to the sauna, so that's good. But
That's one thing definitely you can do.
but this has been such a great conversation, and also I highly recommend your book to anybody who's interested in this. It's such a great read and it's so well written. Did you write it yourself or did you have help with the editing? How did that work?
I wrote it myself. I have an amazing
So
editor
good.
at Penguin Random House, Emily Wunderlich, who really
Mm.
helped me a lot. But yeah, it was a total learning experience. It's my first
Mm.
book. It was a
Oh.
lot of fun to write, and yeah, I've been actually thinking about and writing about these topics. It's been 10 years since I moved to Norway now, and so
Oh gosh.
the book was really a long time coming, and I'm just thrilled that people are going to get to read it. And I hope that like I hope lots of people had the experience you had, and I hope that it gives
Yeah.
them the tools to really embrace the season and to see how their mindset matters at any time of life.
Yeah, it gives you a feeling when you read it. Like if there's a feeling, like a warm kind of feeling where I'm actually wanting to visit those countries now, because I'm like, I want to experience the polar night and I want to
Go to
experience those
Tromso. It's
winters.
the best.
Like,
Do it. Definitely. I think they
I
have
feel like I'll
direct
be
flights from
ready,
London. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So when is your book out?
So it's out October 22nd in the US and hang on. I think October 24th in the UK.
Yeah, it said 24th when I looked.
Okay, yeah. So it's
Yeah.
out. How to Winter will be out October 22nd in the US from Penguin Random House and October 24th in the UK from Bluebird Pan Macmillan.
Oh, lovely. And how can people follow you in the meantime?
Sure. So you can find more information on my website, karileibowitz.com. I also have a newsletter called Wintry Mix that goes out in the winter with more of these kinds of tips of things that you can do to make winter wonderful. So you can also follow me there, and my contact info is on my website. I love to hear from readers and people about your winter experience, what you struggle with, what you love, what changes for you after trying some of these practices and reading the book. So karileibowitz.com.
Lovely. Kari, thank you so much. I really hope we get to do
Thanks
this
so
again.
much. Yeah, me too. It was really great to chat with you.